Namaste. Welcome to Urban Chatterati. And today I have with me Hindol Sen Gupta, author, journalist, and now the person who's running Invest India, selling the India story to the world. Hindol, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Abhinav. It's a real pleasure.
Thank you, Hindol. Hindol, when we talk about the Bengal elections underway these days, we also have to look back at the history of Bengal because Bengal is one of those major centers from where Indian Renaissance did start. Whether you talk about the social reforms, educational reforms, religious reforms, or you talk about the national consciousness. I mean, both Vande Mataram and Jan Gan Man comes from Bengal. So, could you take us back in the history where all this actually did begin?
Right. Well, I mean, Bengal, as you would know, or at least modern Bengal and Calcutta, the wellspring of Bengali culture, is actually a far more recent place than, say, Delhi or Mumbai, Bombay, or even Chennai. Calcutta is, only about 300 plus years old, whereas both Delhi or Mumbai or Chennai have far older histories in many cases. Certainly, Delhi has a much older history, and Calcutta, in that sense, is a fairly new city. Calcutta, people forget that the city of Calcutta was really created, in a sense, by the landed gentry of Bengal on one side and by the British on the other. And it was really, Calcutta was invented in a sense. And if Calcutta didn't exist, they would have to invent Calcutta. Because when the British took over the reins in Bengal, they needed a sort of a home, if I may call it that, in a place which was terribly prosperous. Because remember, it had great ports, all the things that would make a place prosperous in those years. It had great ports. It already had a mercantile community, should I say. It also had a lot of trade and commerce already happening. And it had great wealth because it had extremely prosperous land. In the sense, the land was very fertile. Shiraj-ud-Dawla, the last Nawab of Bengal, was a very wealthy Nawab. He was a very wealthy prince. And the British realized that that region, the very fertile land, the existence of a mercantile class, the existence of a banking community. If you look at who are the people who were financing Shiraj-ud-Dawla and his contemporaries, there was a banking community there, right? So all of these things put together made that place a very fertile ideation ground for the British in the country. And they proceeded to build a class of Indians, or class of Bengalis of that time, in their own image, so to speak, who would be the sort of interlocutors between the sort of natives and the British overlords, right? And that actually created this entire class of sort of, on one part the zamindars or the landowners, and on the other part the sort of educated clerk category people, right? The babus and the zamindars, right? These were the people who kept British power intact around that area and spread it far and wide. Now, what happened there was that many of these people, once they received education of a particular kind, whether from Scottish Church, and remember the kind of people who received that education, or that kind of education, whether it's Swami Vivekananda on one side and Ram Mohan Roy on the other, and right up to, and I was recently doing some research on Srila Prabhupada, the founder of ISKCON, and lo behold, he too went to such a quote unquote missionary school in Calcutta, and was a product of that. And you can see why he then took it upon himself to translate the Bhagavad Gita. And till date, ISKCON has sold 500 million copies of the many books that Srila Prabhupada wrote, most of them in English. But you can see where that education and that love for books came from, right? So this entire world that was created there was based, Abhinav, fundamentally on the ability to do business profitably. So long before the culture arrived, the mercantile nature of Calcutta and Bengal is what we need to focus on. Now, once culture arrived, I mean, the Tagores, for instance, by the time we come to Rabindranath, are actually not a very prosperous and indeed a failing Zamindari family. Right? They are a erstwhile very well-to-do Zamindari family. I mean, the wealth is a lot, so that it sort of drains off. But by the time Rabindranath comes into the picture, it's really at the tail end of that wealth, right? But if you look at where the wealth was first created, you have to look at figures like Dwarkanath Tagore, who really wanted to bring the European Renaissance, in a sense, in the mercantile sense of that word, into Bengal. So, what was he looking at? Well, he was looking at creating banks, he was looking at creating railroads, he was looking at creating steam engine companies, right? So, all of these things, this vision of creating this entire universe, came from Bengal. But you see, Bengal has had over many, many decades. It's one of the, I recently saw a nugget of information which I thought was particularly insightful. It seems that Bengal is one of the few major cities in the country, if not the only major city in the country. Perhaps there are some other cities which I'm not aware of, but among the really big ones, or the only cities which has a net outflow of people. Now, this is really surprising because most other big places have a net inflow of people, right? And Bengal, now the we keep talking about Bengali culture, and yes, of course, there is Bengali culture, but the Hindu Bengali of Bengal is only a limited population now, and Bengal actually is actually dominated by in many ways by people from Bihar, by people from Jharkhand, a lot of Muslim migration from Bangladesh. So it has been when people think of Bengal of the time of Tagore or even Satyajit Ray, that Bengal and today's Bengal is very different. So Bengal is actually very ripe for a sort of socio-cultural economic transformation. And that transformation can only happen if we put enterprise first. And I've argued this in other places, so this is not new. Because you see, before we can go back and say, let's reinvent and bring back the glory of Bengali culture, we have to get the money in, because without the money, it will not work. See, today, this entire thing of Tolabaj, let's look at that word, right? It's being mentioned again and again, Abhinav. Everybody's talking about it. Tolabaj. What is Tolabaj? Well, Tolabaj is basically a sort of slang word. It was not there when I was growing up in Calcutta, even though the phenomena was there, but the word was not there, which means the CPM created Bengal into a party state. And you, as a political scientist, would understand a party state only too well. A party state means that at every level of the state and of society, the party operates everything. From Durga Puja pandals to getting your school admission, to getting your rations, to film festivals, there is nowhere that the party is not there. The party cadre run everything. And the party cadre, because the economic activity was poor, have a cut on every transaction in the state. So if you want to buy cement to build a new house, you have to give the party, the local party cadre, a cut. And what happened later is, once you create this culture, Abhinav, you would understand it's very difficult to take that culture away from society, right? Unless you can really bring in great economic transformation, which of course is still awaited. So that culture is so badly steeped in that in Bengal, the problem is many people, in Bengal, when they have property there, they don't give their property for rent. Because if they do and a local politician gets in, no matter what you do, you can never get the property back. This is unheard of in a place like Delhi or Mumbai. I don't know whether it happens in other parts of India, but certainly in Delhi and Mumbai and Chennai, three cities I know well, and Bangalore, in Bengaluru, these things don't happen. But this is a unique Calcutta phenomenon. So do you, in a nutshell, do you understand where the rot has set in? That, in a nutshell, needs to be changed.
Exactly. So as you rightly pointed out, when Kolkata was growing, it was a trading city, it was a mercantile city, and it was very cosmopolitan. You, even in the beginning of Kolkata, you had so many Europeans living in the city, so many people from other part of the country, British population, and they were quite mixing with the local population as well. From there to 2021, where Kolkata has become a parochial Bengali only city kind of a thing, right? How did that happen? In the sense that when does this cosmopolitan character of Kolkata changed to become a Bengali city in a narrow sense? Of course, it was always a Bengali city.
See, I think a little more nuanced thing has actually happened. See, the Bengalis of Kolkata, the Hindu Bengalis, are now a cornered lot. Actually, today in Kolkata, the street power is with the people from Bihar and Jharkhand and whatever, the Hindi speaking. So there's been a big difference between the streets of Calcutta and the elite class, and also a big difference between the Parganas and Calcutta, right? So therefore, there are multiple layers of class and caste that are colliding. Because you see, the Bengalis were always, population-wise, they were never people who would have many, at least in the recent past, many children. Then many of them took the worst examples of a sort of Americanization, Anglicization, not the good aspects of that. There are good aspects of Anglicization also. Many of the Bengalis took the worst aspects of Anglicization, which is to destroy their own roots, which is to never consider the importance of demography, which is to leave Calcutta and never go back. And, I say this with great responsibility. I am one of those people who left when my schooling got over in Kolkata and never went back. And it's very unlikely that I will ever go back to take up a job there. I might do other work in Bengal and other roles in Bengal, but it's unlikely that I will go and take up employment in Bengal. It's unlikely. Never say never, but it's unlikely. And there are really millions like me. So you see, at the moment, what's happening is that there are so many of these. A lot of Bengalis feel that culturally, economically, socially, they are really in danger, because their culture and whatever they stood for is basically, they neither have muscle power. See, the Marathis, please understand, in other parts of Maharashtra, the agricultural Marathis have a lot of money, right? If you go to Kolhapur, Sholapur, it's full of extremely wealthy people, right? In Mumbai, even if the average Marathi doesn't have that much money compared to many other communities, they have real street muscle power, right? They have community. They have a sense of community and strength in community. But the Bengalis, as the old joke goes, one Bengali is a political party, two Bengali is a argument, three Bengalis is basically two political parties, and four Bengalis is a hartal, right? So you see, this problem of not ever being able to come together as a community and clearly define this is what we stand for has been the biggest problem, right? Also, remember the kind of migration Bengal saw for a long time and continues to see from Bangladesh.
Yes. Also, I think at the root of this is the demographic crisis, as you were talking about.
Of course.
And but there's also one more point which is pointed out by many people, especially these days, when you're talking about Bengali culture. It has become synonymous in the popular imagination with the Kolkata Bhadralok culture. But you have a large populations of this Namoshudras, Rajavanshis, tribal population, which do not identify with this thing. So now what is happening? The Bengali culture is not going away. It's just being redefined with the democratic assertion of these communities. How do you respond to that?
Yeah, so well, look, yes, I understand what you're trying to get at. And I think that you have a point there. But it is very unclear to me that when you say it's being redefined, yes, it is being redefined, but redefined to what? Is it being redefined to become something which is indistinguishable from neighboring Jharkhand and Bihar? If that is true, then there is nothing unique about it. And we still don't know whether it is definitely being redefined, but what it is being redefined to. Because you see, the culture of Bengal, as many of us talk about, had something unique about it. It had a unique voice. It stood for something. It had something to say. Now you can say, well, there were also later on in Bengal's history or Calcutta's history, there was this entire left movement and so on and so forth, and Naxalbari and blah blah blah, right? But even in Naxalbari, you would know, Abhinav, some of the best and brightest students, not just in Bengal, but in India, participated in that movement. They were badly misled. They were badly misled and they were fighting for the wrong cause. And that's why they sank into abysmal depths. That is a different story. So one entire generation got lost in all that nonsense, right? So, but the point is, these were very, very intelligent people, and many of the best professors and other people around the world today who are Bengali come from that generation. It's basically my father's generation, right? They all come from that generation. It's just that they were able to escape. People who stayed in Bengal couldn't escape, and many of them died, of course, due to police brutality and blah blah blah, right?
But they continue to romanticize the present state of Bengal.
Sorry?
But they also continue to romanticize the present state.
That is their mistake, and they're paying the price for it.
Yeah.
Because they have a wrong notion of what makes a city. And the biggest problem there is, you see, the culture that they were all proud of and they had a unique voice, that culture was born from economic prosperity.
Yes.
Rabindranath Tagore was not a poor man. Satyajit Ray was not a poor man. Yes, Satyajit Ray was not as wealthy as, say, Sanjay Leela Bhansali, but he was by no stretch of imagination poor. Right? And Rabindranath Tagore, of course, was a zamindar. No question, right? So many of the great people who had this unique view had the benefits of prosperity. Raja Ram Mohan Roy was not a poor man. Right? And even, the other part, which is Vivekananda, Rani Rashma, Vivekananda, Ramakrishna Paramhans and the entire group of people there, well, they were also supported by people with great wealth, people like Rani Rashmani.
Yeah.
Right? So, Dakshineshwar, which is that great hub of Bengali culture and pride and so on and so on. See, Dakshineshwar was built on the money of Rani Rashmani. Right? I mean, Sri Ramakrishna and the people who gathered around him, see, they were all some of the most cleverest and the most prosperous people in Bengal. There were a lot of ordinary people also, but they were being supported by people who had significant material wealth. And when Vivekananda became what he was, remember, it was Ajit Singh of Khetri who gave him money to go to America. So I am trying to explain to you that this culture that the Bengalis are so proud of course it would sink because it needs significant material backing. And the Bengalis became too convinced about the supremacy of their culture without considering where was that cultural backing. What were the, jisko Hindi mein kehte hain, neev kahan hai? What were the foundations? Because without the power of that, money behind it, it wouldn't exist. So that's the fundamental problem.
Exactly. And there is one more thing which I would like to ask you. I was reading this very good book by Deep Haldar on the Bengal elections, the election
Yes.
diary, when he's talking to several people in Kolkata, and they are saying that we don't see ourselves as Indians, we see ourselves as Bengali first, and so on.
Yeah.
That kind of, which is more of a left kind of a view, which I have also seen and heard from the people in Delhi and so on. But when you look at Bengal, Bengal was the place where national movement, India's national movement, basically consolidated. It acquired a shape. The greatest anti-imperialist song in the world, I would say, Vande Mataram, comes from Bengal. And now you see the same people saying, well, Vande Mataram is communal and fascist. And whole country was singing Vande Mataram. What happened in there? I mean, why is this
This is the communist disease. I mean, this is what 30 years of communism did in Bengal. Because you see, if you look at, this is the other part of Bengali culture that we haven't discussed. So if you look at beginning with Bankim Chandra, right? Who's really, in a sense, the father of the modern Bengali novel and so on and so forth, right? Before him, there's some work, but nothing of the scale that he produced, right? So everything that he produced, whether it's Anandamot, whether it's Raj Singho, whether it's Devi Chaudhuri Rani, whatever, and then followed by Sharat Chandra and all these people. Again, these were also people who were not impoverished, right? I mean, Aurobindo Ghosh, right, probably one of the most prominent revolutionaries of the Indian national movement. It's just that he's never given enough credit. Aurobindo Ghosh is not only a great scholar, but also, again, does not come from poverty. But why Aurobindo Ghosh alone? Let's talk about somebody even more popular. Subhash Chandra Bose did not come from poverty, right? See, we have forgotten that even the process of nationalism and the people who went there and fought this, Chittaranjan Das, Subhash Chandra Bose, Aurobindo, Bankim, they were all people who had material strength. That's why Subhash Chandra Bose never had to worry that he has to get a job somewhere. I mean, Subhash Chandra Bose wouldn't have fled via Afghanistan and gone to Germany and then taken a submarine and come to Southeast Asia to raise an army if he had to think that, oh, I have to, pay for my house rent. Right? I mean, these were people who came from material wealth and they had the Bengalis of today, with the Deep is talking to, I don't know what they are thinking, but those people, when they spoke of a national vision, they were not thinking only that Bengal will change. They were saying Bharatvarsh will change. If you read Aurobindo, for instance, he's not saying my patch of land in Bengal will transform. He is saying Mother India would transform. Right? But you see, did the left teach people for 32 years or 33 years that they were there about Aurobindo? Right? Did they teach people about, Subhash Chandra Bose is very difficult to decry in Bengal, but still, how much of his legacy did we really contemplate on? Even Vivekananda, I write in the Modern Monk that Vivekananda has been transformed into a two-dimensional paperweight. कि वो अच्छा ठीक है, arise awake, उसको आप टेबल के ऊपर रख दो and then everybody is happy. But to truly understand Vivekananda, to truly understand what Vivekananda is trying to do, I wrote in Fortune, where I was editor-in-large for 9 years. I wrote this essay, which is one of the most popular essays ever written on the Fortune India side, on the management model of the Ramakrishna Mission. One of the most well-run spiritual organizations in the world, which has, can you imagine, in all these years, 100 years, it has been, in operation in so many countries around the world. It has never had a scandal.
Yeah.
And you think to yourself, why? Why it has never been a scandal, right? So this is the wonderful thing. And see, Bengalis, the other great thing about Bengalis, and since I'm talking about Vivekananda and Ramakrishna Mission, let me also mention Srila Prabhupada and the ISKCON. See, ISKCON may have had problems in some centers after Srila Prabhupada's death, but I'm confining myself to only while he was alive, right? Now, Srila Prabhupada again effortlessly spoke English and, was a global mind long before globalization came into being. Again, a Bengali who thought not only about his patch of land in Bengal or Vrindavan, for that matter, but thought of Bharat Mata, and not just Bharat Mata, said he would take the word of Krishna for Srila Prabhupada around the world. You see, Bengalis had that vision of taking things to the world, right? Which is one of the great things. What has happened to Bengali society today is it has become insular. It was never insular. It was always talking to the world, right? That was the great thing, and that needs to be re-engineered. But I say to you this, say this again to you, Abhinav, it cannot be re-engineered until the material prosperity comes back, until an entrepreneurial vision is triggered in Bengal. Because you see, sleepy Bangalore, now Bengaluru, could only be transformed when this entrepreneurial bug was injected in it.
Yes, so when I was growing up in Faizabad, which is now under the district of Ayodhya, we
Yeah,
always had this grand celebration of Durga Puja with all those pandals and all.
yeah,
And when you moved out of the district, I mean, around that region, you will not see that. And then I realized the reason is that there was a Bengali community in Faizabad, very old Bengali community, which started this tradition somewhere in the 40s and the 50s. So we have a mini Bengal Durga Puja culture, which is now, of course, spread to other districts after liberalization. But earlier it was confined to that place only. But this is what Bengali community was spreading out, right? Not trying to erect walls against the other people. Last
exactly.
two questions, Hindu. One question which
I
is
want to tell you, this is a joke. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but this is a joke. Please remember, even about domestic tourism, one of the most intrepid bunch of travelers in India
I
are
agree.
the Bengalis with their suitcases and their monkey caps on Indian Railway.
I fully agree.
You see, you go to Ladakh, you will find some Bengali with a monkey cap. You go to, Nathula Pass, you will find some Bengali with an angry. So it is to look at the world, right?
Hmm.
See, now it has all become inward looking. कि अच्छा, Jadavpur में जो हो रहा है वही अच्छा है. But I mean, that was not how it was ever.
Yeah, agreed. And last two questions, Hindul. One is, which is coming up again and again these days.
Yeah.
What is the legacy of the reform movement led by Raja Ram Mohan Roy,
Yeah.
Ishwar Vidyasagar, Ramakrishna Paramhans, Vivekanand, and so on? Because now you see there is an argument, mostly an orthodox, social orthodox argument that these people destroyed Hinduism and they were crypto Christians and so on. How do you, or let's say, how do you look at this entire phenomenon of the reform movement?
I mean, you'll forgive me for saying this, but you see, the Indian debates of this nature, of this importance and depth in the Indian public square is rarely ever literate. These are all illiterate arguments made by people who don't know anything. They have never really read Ram Mohan Roy. They've never really read most of these people. Look, you have to. This is the interesting thing. I mean, this is a very Audrey Truschke argument, completely devoid of context, right? Look, you have to look at the context in which these people were surviving, right? I mean, at the end of the day, you have to. I mean, it's like asking me today, oh, but why don't I wear a tweed coat and step out in Mayur Vihar? Well, that's because I don't live in London. I live in Mayur Vihar. You have to look at my context, right? They had a context. I'm obviously making a joke to make a far more serious point. Whether it's Ram Mohan, whether it's Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar, whether it's any of these people, right? They operated in a context. They were responding. 18th, 19th century Bengal was one of the most viciously superstitious and a gruesome place. Please read 18th, 19th century Bengal. Please read what Vivekananda wrote about it. Look at what they were seeing around them. They were seeing society after so many years of Muslim rule and then British oppression and rule. It was a society whose backbone had been broken. It was a mercilessly insular, terrible society. See, the reawakening again begins with first with Ram Mohan and then, of course, goes all the way to Vivekananda. We are talking about pre-Renaissance Bengal. That Bengal is a hideous place. Please go and read. I mean, not to you per se, but I'm saying people who make this argument should go and read about 18th and 19th century Bengal. Before the coming of the Renaissance, Bengal Renaissance, what was Bengal? It was a terrible place. What these people were responding to around them was the worst kind of, how should I put it? I mean, superstition is a very mild word for it. It was truly superstition taken to a ghoulish level. So they were then trying to respond and say, no, Hinduism is this great wellspring of knowledge which needs to be centered around the world. Now, there you may say, oh, well, why did they quote Max Muller, whatever, and where somebody had. Those are, of course, when you work in a context, you're never going to get everything perfect. But they were clearly responding to their context and the world that they saw. and they were responding, or they were articulating feelings or beliefs that they had about the world that they saw. And once the Renaissance began, remember, I mean, just the Renaissance beginning is not enough. It takes time to percolate into the wider society. So it took time, about 100 years before things changed in Bengal. But were they crypto Christians making everybody Christian? That's madness. I mean, mad people say this, and there's no dearth of mad people in our country. So, and some are outside our country also. I don't want to take any names, but some are in our country, some are outside our country, whatever. But anyway, I am not as is very apparent from my earlier statements and my writings and stuff. I think we should look at it with far more depth
Nice.
and nuance and depth. This is exactly the same thing. I mean, exactly the same sort of thing is said about India even today,
Hmm.
right? You take no context and you say, oh, look, this is what is happening.
And this is the orthodox argument, but there's also a liberal argument who call themselves as social progressive, who call
Yeah.
themselves as intellectuals and left and so on. And they say that Bengal is now being invaded by Hindutva. This Hindutva is this barbarism which is coming and destroying the unique Bengali culture and identity. How do you
Yeah.
see the role of Hindutva in Bengal in the historical context and also in the present
Yeah.
context?
So let me say this, Abhinav. Here's the interesting thing. In most of these conversations, Hindutva is seen as a monolith. I have said this in some of my lectures that both Hindutva and the RSS are not a monolith. Like every other institution in our country, they cannot be a monolith because it doesn't work to be a monolith in our country, right? I think if there is Hindutva in Bengal, it will be uniquely Bengali Hindutva. Like Hindutva in Assam or Meghalaya or Manipur or Mizoram takes the shape and color in many ways of the local culture, so it will be in Bengal. The broad principles of Hindutva remain what they are, but Hindutva in Karnataka will be Kannadiga Hindutva. Hindutva in Ayodhya will be Ayodhya Hindutva. Hindutva in Tamil Nadu will be Tamil Hindutva. That's the only way Hindutva will truly become a countrywide force for transformation of India. Because if it's a monolith, there will always be challenges which cannot be subsumed and consumed. I think the great thing, the best ideologies in India that work are supple ideologies, which are able to, without losing its soul, are able to accommodate and absorb local nuances.
Yeah.
Now, it's not up to me to say whether this will happen in Bengal or not. Only time will tell. You asked me a theoretical question, so I'm giving you a hypothetical, theoretical answer based on what we have seen in other parts of India.
But is Hindutva alien to Bengal?
Well, if Hindutva says Vande Mataram is a great slogan, well, Vande Mataram, the slogan was given by a Bengali. If Hindutva worships Aurobindo, well, Aurobindo was a Bengali. If Hindutva bows its head to Swami Vivekananda, well, Swami Vivekananda is as integral to Bengal as anything else in the world. Right? So again,
And let's not forget Shyama Prasad Mukherjee.
And Shyama Prasad Mukherjee, and there will be many others. There will be many others. My father tells the story that the father of one of his closest friends and a great scholar of mathematics of their time, and we are now talking about the late 40s, early 50s. My father would see as a schoolboy the elderly mathematics professor, after teaching in whatever, would have Jansang, he was part of the Jansang at that time, would have hand painted Jansang posters, and he had a family helper, who had been in the family for a long time. So with that man, he would would go marching down the streets of Calcutta and with a glue, a sort of tin of glue, put up those posters. Right? This is my own father. My father has seen this with his own eyes. Right? So we are now talking about the 50s. Right? So, this entire idea of, ideologies, and, if you look at Anushilan Samiti, I'm sure you've heard of Anushilan Samiti. If you look at many of these organizations, Anushilan Samiti and all these other people, they were talking about a Hindu version of the world only, right? And, you look at, I have often quoted this wonderful essay, Swaraj and Ideas, right? You look at many of the thought processes that were happening at that time, they were talking about, and they remember used to use, many of them use the word Hindu as a synonym to Indian, right? They would keep, the great book, Hindu Chemistry, it's being used as a synonym to Indian, right? So to say that this ideology is alien, but alien where? It always existed. All the iconography around that the BJP uses and the people it holds as icons, many of them are Bengali.
Even the depiction and the painting of Bharat Mata comes from Bengal.
Abanindranath Thakur's painting.
Yeah.
The Bharat Mata painting that everybody is excited about, that is painted by a Bengali. In fact, not only a Bengali, one of the Tagores. Not just a Bengali. No. One of the Tagores, no less. So I wouldn't buy. See, and anyway, at the end of the day, what does it mean to say, oh, some ideology is alien? If people are voting for that ideology today, then it's not alien, no.
Yeah.
As in, what is alien and unalien? If people don't vote, then it's alien. If people vote, then it stops being alien. Right? So these are political things that people keep saying. I would look at a broader transformation in Bengal. That's what I'm more interested in. That can Bengal really tap into its old ideas of mercantile enterprise? Can the Hooghly once again be one of the great entrepreneurial destinations? The banks of the Hooghly be one of the great entrepreneurial destinations of the world?
Yes.
That's when we will change things. And if you ask me, that is the great, as a young Bengali, though living outside Bengal, we still have a home in Bengal, and many of my relatives are still there, who feel very connected to Bengal. That's my vision. I would say that is my vision, to bring back the strength of entrepreneurship and enterprise into Bengal.
Exactly, Hindol. So we all hope, in fact, that Bengal will again see that renaissance which it saw long back, because what is modern India, the definition of modern Indian, is completely interlinked with the Bengali consciousness. Because what the people think themselves today, what does it mean to be an Indian? A lot of it comes from Bengal. So I hope we will see the renaissance in the coming years, and we will continue this discussion on Bengal, because this is a very interesting topic. This is something which has been neglected, or we only have one-sided view on this topic. But thank you, Hindol, for coming and telling the audience the other side of the story about Bengal. Thank you.
Thank you, Abhinav. Thank you for having me. It was a real pleasure, as always, to talk to you.
And thank you, audience, for listening to us. And please don't forget to subscribe the channel and join the channel. See you soon again. Thank you.